of all the teams in the lottery, the Mavericks are the luckiest to trade, or likeliest, I'm sorry, likeliest to trade their pick. And if they do trade the pick, how important is it for them to get off long-term money, or are they more focused on getting the best player back that they can?
I mean, it's kind of a combination of both because getting off money gives you more avenues to go trade for players or sign players, even if you're not signing free agents outright. I've kind of looked at Aaron Gordon in Denver as a good example, where
Yeah.
Aaron Gordon was available because he had an extension coming up that Orlando was not going to pay him. And Denver had the cap flexibility to go trade for him at a slightly reduced price, but they also, had the young players and the assets available to go trade for him. But they also had the cap space. It's all these things come together. I think we think about cap space as being, oh, you can go sign a free agent. And cap space is just a tool that you use at all times. And if you have less, if you have more of your core together under less money, you can go add a player even at an overpriced, or a theoretically overpriced or at just a larger sum to go get him. So I do think that there is immediate value for the Mavericks being able to move on from someone like Davis Bertans. And if it took, look, they're not going to trade 10 in Bertans just to get rid of Bertans' money or anything like that. That is an overreach. But just being smart about offloading some salary and, you know, keeping the, what few assets of value that they have intact to go get veteran players because they're trying to win now. I think that's the idea. And the idea of just drafting someone at 10 is that, as the moment you draft that player, either he needs to contribute, he needs to join the starting lineup, he needs to be a player who's useful. And that's not often what you get from a number 10 pick in his rookie year. Or you need to use that pick to go get a player in that vein. Because the moment you draft a
Hmm.
player and he's not immediately ready rookie year, that value goes down until he starts proving something. And so that's kind of the situation they're in, and it's tricky. There's not a clear path forward. Um, uh, and I don't want to say they're stuck, but they've got tricky decisions. There's a very tight line they have to walk this summer.
Yeah.
So
Would like a trade where they offload Bertans but like move back in the draft be like a possibility to like later in the lottery or even like late teens or something like that? Is that the kind of idea?
I think so. I don't think I think they view the number 10 pick, and we're still a month out. We don't know who's going to fall. There's mock
Yeah.
draft saying Taylor Hendricks is going to be
yeah,
available at 10, which doesn't feel likely to me, but it does. He feels like that. Taylor Hendricks feels like a player who immediately fits needs, could probably contribute as a rookie, and then we'll get better from there. And maybe that's worth it, you know. But it does feel like they're really looking at the number 10 pick as how can we use this to get veteran win now players. And if I'm them, I would be very interested in a potential trade down to bring back, a number 15, a number 21. But, I think it just depends on what's there. And, the trade landscape is complicated.
so when you're thinking about potential trade targets for the number 10, what type of players or skill sets do you think the Mavs are looking for?
Big wings and, centers who are defensive minded, who rebound, who protect the rim.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, everybody wants a big wing. Like that's the number one. Maybe the most valuable in terms of like there's a scarcity of such role players, um, who kind of are these two-way, the anchors of a modern defense in a lot of ways. It's really become, the switchable 6'8", 6'9" wing, as much as it is any sort of big man or rim protector. And, the best version of that player that Dallas had, they traded, in Dorian Finney-Smith to go get Kyrie Irving, who they want to resign, who they expect to resign, but Kyrie is Kyrie. We'll see what happens. But, that's what they need. That's very clearly what they need. They need defenders, and specifically they need tall defenders. And, what position they play, they can, beggars can't be choosers, but they need tall defenders of some type.
You wrote an article about some fake trades. either involving the 10 pick or just trading existing guys on the roster. Were there any of those deals that you especially liked when you came
I
up with?
think,
You're like, oh, this is a good one.
yeah. I mean, I got roasted for the first one, and it's funny. I kind of think of these as like frameworks.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so the Mavericks need, a tall wing and they need a center. And I'm looking around the league and I'm like, are there any teams that even sort of have two expendable players who kind of fit that archetype?
Right.
And I suggested Otto Porter Jr. and Chris Boucher from Toronto. And the problem is both of them are just not good enough to really fit. Like Otto has injury concerns, and Boucher just might not be that good. He's 30 now, came into the
Right.
league at 25. He's
Wow. I
he's
can't believe he's 30.
Yeah,
right.
that is wild.
I would have not
Yeah, that
guessed
shocked me too. But the idea was like, how many teams are even out there that have two players, are in a situation where they might be willing to try to get draft picks and move up in the draft?
Yeah.
If Toronto tears down, that might be something they're interested in. Obviously, that would be something they're interested in. And then do they have expendable veterans, that are, not stars that would take more than what Dallas is willing to offer? And that's kind of the problem. Like, you can look at that deal, rightly so. And I wrote, like, the problem is these players probably just aren't good enough. Dallas wouldn't do this deal. But you look around the league, there's not a lot of teams. There's not a lot of combinations like that makes sense both for, the Mavericks to be trading with them, for the team to be interested in trading up for a pick, to have these expendable players. I think the one that made the most sense is Clint Capella for Tim Hardaway Jr. And
I was going to say, I like that one as well, because you mentioned like the big wings versus the defensive center, and it feels like you could get more value if you did trade for the defensive center, just because everyone wants a big wing.
Right. And, Capella makes, I think, about 40 million over 2 years. And so, it's not the best value for a player who, he's going to give you 25, 30 minutes. I am team unless it's an elite player on at least elite center on one end or the other, or especially both. You don't want to commit big money to them. But Clint Capella is the type of player they need. And, a shooting for, defense swap and bringing size. And, we know where Clint Capella played best. It was in Houston with James Harden, the player that Luka gets compared to the most often. Even if it took a pick swap in there as well, which is just, number 10 going to Atlanta, number 15 going to Dallas, and that's Atlanta's pick. I think that's worth it. But these are kind of the questions that Dallas has this summer. And I could imagine a situation where both teams are kind of like aware of this trade and they're like, we might do it. Dallas is like, we might do it. Atlanta's like, well, we might do it. And it's just sitting on a whiteboard somewhere, and both of them are just like, please, we want to get something better than this. Right. And maybe if you get to draft night and Atlanta's like, okay, fine, we like that player at 10, there's a player at 10 we like, let's do the deal.
Yeah, it's almost too reasonable on both sides.
Right.
I did like the trade, not necessarily because of who's involved, but just your title for it. Trade 7, add some Pelicans. It makes it sound like it doesn't really matter who it is. Let's just get some Pelicans in here, see what happens.
I mean,
they do have a lot of guys,
and Pelicans are known for their wingspan.
That's true. Great point.
Yeah. Facts. Yeah. So like I said, they need some size and they need some physicality. Pelicans are pretty aggressive, physicality, aggression. I think it goes hand in hand, why not?
Oh, so if the Mavs do decide, hey, we're just going to stay at 10, we're going to draft somebody, do Mavs fans have a prospect that they are hoping will fall to them? Is like Taylor Hendricks the dream scenario here?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm not the first one to say this, but I like pretty much all of the first 9 prospects for the Mavericks. And, what I'm obviously saying is I like the players that are slotted to go 5 through 10, 5 through 9, 6 through 9.
Yeah.
I was at the combine a couple of weeks ago. I asked around Wembanyama. The expectation is that Wembanyama's not going to fall to 10. We'll see what happens on draft night. We never know.
You're reporting
but that's
that?
the expectation. So yeah, that's a report. Sources say. But yeah, like it's really the trio of Anthony Black, of Taylor Hendricks, And who's the third? I'm just blanking on because
Jarris Walker.
Jarris
yes,
Walker,
yeah,
probably.
Walker. All three of those players fit immediate needs for the Mavericks. They have varying levels of ready now, and they have various levels of where their ceilings are at. I like all three of those players. They've most consistently been mocked in that 6 to 9 range.
Mhm.
And if all of them are off the board, and even, I think they'd have to consider, also Thompson as well. Someone I don't
Yeah.
love, especially is like immediate readiness on the defensive end. Yes, offensively, I'm not so sure, but
Yeah.
you'd have to consider that. But if all those players are gone and you're starting to get into the developmental wings, people like Leonard Miller, or if it's a bunch of guards, like I'd consider Kobe Buffkin, because he feels like the one out of all
Buffkin
those combo
boys.
guards, out of all
Buffkin
those guards,
boys.
he's kind of like can play a 3-and-D role more than
Yeah.
the other guys who are like their value is on the ball. The Mavericks don't
Yeah.
have on ball minutes and touches to hand around if what happens this summer happens, which, what they expect to happen this summer happens, which is re-signing Kyrie. And, Jaden Hardy is, more or less broke into the rotation the second half of the year. And he's expected to, be an every game player. That's the hope. And so they don't have a lot of on-ball touches. So if they were to draft a guard, it would need to be someone like Buffkins, who is, more able to be a secondary creator and a good defender, even if he's not, the big wing type. But I think the point of this is like, there's not a, they if they're the ninth, if they have the ninth pick, if they have the eighth pick, you really have to think more like, oh, one of these guys is going to be available. They have to consider that. And now it's just a tricky thing of waiting until the draft and seeing if somebody falls. And maybe they trade it anyway, but if somebody falls, at least that gives them, hopefully more value in the Mavs perspective, that somebody's going to be wanting to move up and trade with them.
Yeah. You reported that Dallas isn't likely to be interested in Grady Dick. What is wrong with Grady Dick?
His name's too funny. Simple as that. They're out on funny names. They just want to draft people like you're just like John Smith.
They're really glad when Adam Bona got out of the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the better way to say this, and I probably should have worded it more specifically on my part. My understanding is the Mavericks, this front office, been in charge for a couple of years after some stuff that happened a couple summers ago. I think that they really value physicality and athleticism and defense, and are not as enamored with, specialist players. And Grady Dick actually had a really good combine. A lot of his athletic measures are higher than expected. And, there's actually been, some reporting even today around some Dallas people saying that Grady Dick is working out with the Mavericks. If he passes athleticism standards, then yeah, maybe he is an option. But I just think, what the way it was described to me is that Grady Dick kind of falls into a type of player that used to be a prospect that Dallas would really consider under their old front office. And I think this new front office has different priorities. And unless Grady Dick, comes out and just really disproves some of the, notions about, what he can be as a defender, as a shot creator, and as just as an athlete, I don't think that he's likely to be considered there.